Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov, good evening. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. All the survivors especially. You survived the fast, but more importantly, you survived the whole week of learning with us. So, Baruch Hashem. Our Kehillah never gets a break. They just, only when we come to Florida, they get a break. I wanted just to take a minute to introduce my wife. Not that you haven't met her before, and not that she needs my introductions, but I think that tonight, if I may, the Rabbanit is going to venture into territory that she usually doesn't when she's on the road. My wife, though she is a Rabbanit, wears many hats and turbans, scarves. When I met my wife, she was finishing or had finished a bachelor's in behavioral science, and then she was debating what she should do with her life going forward. And with the blessing of her Rebbe, the Rebbe of Karlin, and the encouragement of Rabbanit Adina Bar Shalom, at a very brief moment in time, their paths crossed. That's the daughter of Chacham Ovadia, the mother-in-law of Rabbi Dweck, for those who know. She told my wife, you could be whoever you want to be, just go do it. And my wife applied for a master's program in Israel. Unfortunately, because I lived in the United States, she decided to follow me here. She followed me to the United States, where she joined the master's program at Wurzweiler School of Social Work at Yeshiva University. As she was deciding to finish her master's of social work and go into field work, she was, are you allowed to say field work anymore, 2025?
We've changed.
We're in Florida though, we're okay. So I think in California you can't say field work anymore. We are in, am I allowed to make this introduction to your show?
Yeah.
The Rabbanit was in the middle of getting ready, doing her hour of social work. After you become a social worker, they take all of your money in student loans. Now you have to pay them back by working for a few thousand hours of supervised clinical work. And while she was giving one of her last speeches there, the dean of the university heard her speak and said, I need you in our PhD program. And recruited her straight out of the master's program into the PhD program. My wife spent the next 7 years, kimat, researching a very niche topic, something that nobody has ever written about ever in the world of academia, and that is suicide in insular communities, I'm speaking for you, but in particular the Hasidic community of Borough Park, New York. And that's research that is relevant to a lot of communities that suffer from very similar social issues as other communities that don't bring their stuff out. And the Rabbanit, as an insider who speaks Yiddish and came from the community but was not part of the community anymore, was able to navigate this very unique, straddled both worlds. Enough of the world to be able to speak to people, but not enough of the world to report back to anybody that mattered. And therefore was able to make some very interesting observations in that research. 7 and some years later, she graduated with her PhD, and which she is now an associate professor, more than that actually now, at Yeshiva University, as well as at the University of the Pacific. And while she does all of that, she also sees her clinical patients on her own, as well as runs around the world with me, teaching Torah in every possible place that we can, and having a kehillah and a family. And so with this long ramble of an introduction, what I mean to tell you is, I have one job and I barely am able to pull it off. And the Rabbanit has like 17 of them, and she's constantly signing up for more. So what I wish to share with you tonight is that sometimes you meet a person and they're married to a rabbi, and because they're married to the rabbi, they call them Rabbanit, and they have to sit through their Torah classes. And my wife, even if she had nothing to do with me, would be someone you should come listen to in her own right. Not just the Torah that she has to teach, but she has a tremendous ability to look into people, to look into the world, to see problems, to identify those problems, and to suggest solutions that, in my opinion, have always been right so far. And so, without any further delay, I would like to present on a topic that was very meaningful to us, in particular, as leaders of a community that went through COVID, that went through a world locking down, that sees young people running away from the world. The topic tonight is very deeply related to the Torah, but in the words of the Rambam, it may not be the chef in the kitchen tonight. Maybe it's not going to be exactly out of Masechet Yevamot or where else. But it's going to come out of the deepest part of humanity, and humanity is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creations as well. And so I'm going to move my chair back to where it came from, and without any further ado, Rabbanit Dr. Devorah Halevy, thank you. You know we're proud of you? Your microphone.
I'm not in the middle?
I'll make sure she's in the middle. You can move the camera, then you might.
Yeah.
She was
Okay. So my husband talked about problems. They say there was once a lady who was unfortunately on her deathbed. And she calls her husband over. She says, Alex, remember when 25 years ago we were on that beautiful yacht and suddenly I got so sick? And he says, yeah, but why? What? Don't worry. Now I just want you to be. She said, no. You were there and you helped me. He says, yeah, of course, I remember. She said, I remember when it was like 15 years ago, we were walking in the streets and I tripped and I fell and I broke my legs. He says, yeah, sweetie, but why now? You don't. He said, yeah, and you were right there on my side. He says, of course, but why now? She said, and the more recently when unfortunately she had a heart attack and passed out in the middle of the speech. And he says, yeah, but why now? She says, no, because you were also there at my side then. He says, I know, sweetie, but why now? She looks at him and says, I'm beginning to think maybe it's you and your bad luck. But I have to say the opposite. Everything that my husband just said, the truth is that we do not just things together, but he is always the one who's guiding me, pushing me, and encouraging me. I finished my BA program in Israel, it's true. And then I had applied to Ben Gurion University and I got in. And then I met him and moved back to the States. And then we were just on the phone. It was 4:00 in the afternoon. I had finished teaching. I said, I really want to go to a master's program. He says, why don't you go to Yeshiva University? I said, I don't know. I didn't know I had permission to go. I'm coming from Borough Park. Like Yeshiva University, you might as well say, like, go to the world of heretics. He said, why don't you just call them and apply? I called. I don't know why they answered. The school was closed. She said, why don't you come down for an interview tomorrow? And that's how I got into my master's program. And then there were 2 summers that I had to go back to New York and leave him behind with the Kila. I said, no, it doesn't make sense. Maybe I should switch tracks. Maybe I should go to a different school. And he said, why? This is something you want to do. And every time my professors would say, your husband lets you do this? And I said, it's 2025. Husbands don't have to let. But not only does he let, every part of my journey, he has been the one who has not just encouraged me actively, but really pushed me forward. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you not just on the side of Torah and mitzvot, but really everything else. So thank you for being there on that journey. And Chacham Yitzhak was very worried at the amount of people in here. So I want to tell you something. But before I say that something, I want you to look around. This is what our Kehillah looks like on a big Shabbat. Okay? So that's one. The second thing is I want to tell you a joke. They say it was once on a very, very frosty, cold night in New York, similar to tonight. Freezing cold, everybody's wearing their coats, their boots, their gloves. We were at the beach today. I can't tell you. I was thinking we might as well have stayed in New York. It was so cold. But then we remembered we like the people here better, so it's good. It's freezing, it's snowing, it's a blizzard. 6 feet of snow, 7 feet. Speaker walks in, he sees the room is empty. And he feels bad. When you're a speaker and you're prepared and you wanted to give a sermon, he looks around the room, no one there. I'm going to speak anyway. I don't care. It's an empty auditorium. What do I care? He gets up to the podium and he starts speaking and speaking and speaking. And suddenly he sees somebody trudging in, half frozen like an Eskimo. Their ears are swollen. Takes off his gloves, his boots, and he comes and sits down. So finally, he starts the speech again. He starts from the beginning and he talks and he talks and he talks. An hour and a half later, he comes down from the podium. He goes up to the guy, he says, thank you so much. You don't understand. I've been waiting to give this lecture for months. I so much appreciate it. I know it's a blizzard outside. I know how horrible the weather is. Thank you for trekking out. If I can ask, please tell me who you are. And the guy looks at me and he says, me? I'm the second speaker on the list tonight. I want to tell you, Chacham Yitzhak, for us, and I know I speak for both of us, quality over quantity always matters. And I want to really thank each of you. I know that today was a fast. It's almost New Year's. There are 101 reasons on a Tuesday night not to come out and learn. And the fact that you're here and you're with us, we love you. We appreciate it. And without further ado, I want to start. These are actually my cheat sheets. What do I mean? It's the very raw, ugly side of what source sheets look like before they're made. Originally, I asked Chacham Yitzhak to print it, and I think he went ahead and out of the benevolence of his heart, he made about 30 copies. So the nice thing is I'm going to share them with you because I might as well give you the sources that you and I are going to go through together tonight. So let me pass them out. Forgive the formatting. My secretary was not available at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm looking at you.
I was working till 7.
I know. Yeah, but not on my project. I have some more if we need. Tonight's conversation, I believe, was titled Loneliness, Isolation, and Sephardic Judaism as the Antidote. I want to start with a story. That was not the title. Tell me the title.
The Epidemic of Loneliness.
Oh, thank you.
Isolation, belonging, and the Sephardic model of community.
That's it. That's what I meant.
They almost left. I figured it out like it was the wrong lecture tonight.
Sorry, I forgot it's the wrong course I'm teaching tonight. Yeah, I do have some more. Here, you can keep them over here, sweetie. Yeah? Okay. This story happened to us just a few days ago. We had landed Christmas Eve in Miami's airport, and we didn't realize that we could have probably walked from New York, because in that airport, we walked for about an hour and a half until we got to the car rental. The place was desolate. There's nobody there except for us and like a few ethnic groups who clearly don't celebrate Christmas like us. And as we're coming to our car rental booth, we hear somebody yelling, clearly a very disgruntled customer. We come closer, and the guy is standing there, his poor wife and 2 kids who wish they were not related. He's yelling at the agent. My lawyer said I deserve a raise. I need a better car for the amount I paid. You're gypping me. This is not right. This is not okay. And wow, this is really... And he says, yeah, and my lawyer, and he keeps telling the guy across the counter, the guy said, I'm so sorry, I understand, but we don't have that class car anymore. It's completely booked out. It's Christmas. There's no... He says, no, my lawyer said you should get me the manager. And my lawyer said, I'm thinking, he has a lawyer on retainer. Who's he talking to? And then he looks at the guy and he says, yeah, and I want to tell you that my lawyer is not just my lawyer, but he's also my therapist, and he's my consultant, and he's also my doctor, and he's my mental health professional. And he takes his phone and he says, look, you see this ChatGPT? Listen to what he has to say. And he proceeds to put it on speaker and has ChatGPT read out to the person. And the guy says, yes, you are correct. According to what you have paid, you should be getting a higher raise of car. And you should argue with the manager and tell...
The whole time he was arguing with
the entire time he is having a conversation with the manager, and his ChatGPT is directing him on how to have this conversation. I've never in my life seen something, had it not been real, it probably would have been so funny. It was so sad. He was absolutely serious when he said, this is my therapist, and this is my lawyer, and this is my friend, and this is my companion. And at that point, his wife actually walked away, as did the kids. And I thought to myself, what a tragic state of affairs that there's a human being. Now, to be fair, I saw recently there was a lady who married her ChatGPT, and they had a whole procession. And while we may think this is funny, this is symptomatic of something so much bigger. There's something very wrong that a human being feels closer to a machine than another human being. That they feel they can consult, they can confide, they can talk to something that's not real and get better advice and closer connection than another human being is absolutely not normal. I want to talk to you about that tonight and walk you through some sources. Like Chacham Yonatan said, today we're going to do the sous chefs. I'm going to take you into the world of psychology and social work and a little bit around the globe, and then bring you back to the Torah. I'm not talking politics. The Surgeon General, who was, I believe, the 17th and 19th, because he served, 19th and 21st, thank you. That's what it says over here, 19th and 21st. Dr. Vivek H. Murthy. For those of you familiar, he grew up in England to Indian parents, and then moved out to Miami, where he completed his high school, college, and then went on to be the Surgeon General. And went on to publish a fascinating book, which I can't recommend enough. It's a very short book, comes in paperback. You could actually find it online, called The Epidemic of Loneliness. I want to read a little bit from his introduction to his book. So you have it over here. It's the letter from the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Now, why did I tell you his background? Because it's important. I believe it was either, I don't remember, Mark Twain maybe, or Albert Einstein, who says really every book is just an autobiography. The fact that he grew up as a second generation, as a child of immigrants who moved across the country, who didn't necessarily fit in one of his talks that he recently gave in 2025, he very candidly said he grew up always feeling so lonely, but so embarrassed that he must be the only crazy person in the world who feels so alone that he didn't want to share it with anybody. He said only later on, when he went on this journey across the United States, did he realize that there's a whole world of lonely souls. It's not just him. So let's look at his letter. He writes, when I first took office as Surgeon General in 2014, I didn't view loneliness as a public health concern. But that was before I embarked on a cross-country listening tour, where I heard stories from my fellow Americans that surprised me. So he did something very wise. Instead of going on a speaking tour, he went on a listening tour. And he went across the nation. And what he found was 1 out of 2 American adults expressed feeling tremendous loneliness. They said, I feel alone. I don't have people to speak to. I don't have relationships to count on. From simple things like, who do I say, hi, how are you? To much bigger things. Who do I consult with when I have problems, when I'm not feeling well, when I'm emotionally in a place that I need another human being? I don't have that other person. He said, as he went from state to state, from county to county, he realized that this is not a small problem. This is huge. This is something that continuously came up from all the things that he said. Tell me what your biggest issues in this city are. Loneliness stuck out across the board. He says so much so, if you look at the bold, he says in recent years, about 1 in 2 adults in America reported experiencing loneliness. And that was before the COVID-19 pandemic cut us off from so many of our friends, loved ones, and support systems, exacerbating loneliness and isolation. So just definitions. Loneliness is a subjective feeling. It's how I feel. Isolation is objective, meaning you are alone. Loneliness is I feel alone. It doesn't matter if I can be in a crowd of people. It doesn't matter if I have 1 million people, but I feel that way. Now, I don't know about Florida because I think you didn't have COVID, but the rest of us did. It was incredible. So much so that in the summer of COVID, we had in Las Vegas, the school boards got together. They have done that. In Las Vegas, they had lockdowns and shutdowns and social distancing. In the summer, the school board got together in the high schools, and they said that unfortunately, they see such a high rise in the suicides of teenagers that the risk of having the schools closed is outweighed by the risk of suicide, and therefore they opened the schools sooner than was recommended, not because they believed it was safer, but simply because keeping them closed and keeping the teenagers away from each other, they felt was more detrimental. So what happens? He says loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and societal health. So loneliness isn't just a feeling. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical inaction. And the harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, workplaces, and civic organizations where performance, productivity, and engagement are diminished. So you have to understand, we think of loneliness as just a feeling. Like, okay, so you feel, grow up. Feelings aren't facts. It doesn't really matter. But when you start looking at the health system, we realize that the loneliness directly impacts the physical health of people, whether it's cardiovascular disease, whether it's going to be dementia, things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with emotional distress are directly impacted. So much so, now he's not recommending that you smoke 15 cigarettes a day. Okay, that's not the takeaway. So like if you have a lot of friends and you smoke, it doesn't counteract each other. Simply the significance of the loneliness is so great that it has a similar effect like people who are busy smoking and wasting their way of life. Now he goes on then to talk about, okay, so what are the solutions? I don't want to talk to you about solutions yet. I want to talk to you about the problem still. Loneliness is not a new issue, okay? He didn't discover it. We for sure live in a world that exacerbates it. In fact, I'm sure you see this. There's almost an inverse relationship between the amount of virtual friends people have to the amount of real friends people have. They say they once were setting up for a funeral of somebody who was a famous influencer. So they set up about 2 million chairs, and then only 3 people showed. I said, what happened? You had 3 million friends. Right, because 3 million virtual friends don't amount for real friends. Now, I say that lightly because many of us actually were virtual friends before we became real friends. But in Jason's words, which I think are correct, when I met Jason on Friday, I said, I feel like we're friends. He said, no, we were just fans of yours. I'm not friends with anybody until I meet them in person. And I agree with him. I think there's something about the human touch that it doesn't matter how connected you are online, it cannot be replaced by this face-to-face encounter. Now, this is something that was studied in depth, not in adults, but in young children. So I want to walk you through 3 different sociologists who talk about attachment, connection, relationships, and how important they are for our future. So if you turn the next page, and 2, okay, I have somebody by the name of John Bowlby. He's born in London. Now, interestingly enough, he is not Jewish. You should know the non-Jewish world is not wrong when they say there are certain fields that are dominated by Jews and they hate it. The world of mental health in general, it's not just Sigmund Freud who's Jewish, but every other therapist and somebody who's come up with a theory. Bowlby himself is not Jewish, but his mentor before and after and both were. It's important to understand context. So he's living in 1907 all the way to 1990, meaning he lives through both world wars. He grows up in a world where he's from an upper middle class. So think about wealthy, but not very, very wealthy, but still with the attitude of children should be seen, but not heard. In fact, the leading psychologists of those days felt that if parents would hug or kiss their children too much, they would raise them to be dependent brats that could never thrive in society. So they felt that it was much better for the children to almost 23 hours a day be with their nannies, and 1 hour a day come be with a parent, for the photo op and then send them away. And that was the world he grew up in. Now, he ended up doing research both in World War I and World War II, and specifically, but not exclusively, on the kinder transport. For those of you familiar, the kinder transport, as well as during World War II, London it wasn't like France that was stuck in a stalemate, but it was still heavily impacted by the war. And they started moving the children to the countryside because they were really afraid. So you had tremendous trainfuls, the kinder transport of Jewish children. You also had non-Jewish children where at a very young age, they were taken away from their parents, obviously for their safety. But he then went on to say, well, what happened to those children? What happened emotionally? Now, again, the reason he was so interested, he writes in his own memoirs that he always felt a tremendous lack because they never let him connect to his mom. So he had a nanny from age 1 till I believe 5 that he was very, very close to. And she was warm and she was affectionate and she loved him. She was like his mother. Unfortunately, she retired, and he then had a nanny who replaced her. Think of a witch, who was cold, who was mean, who was very disciplined. And he said his whole life he grew up with this feeling of, I had a mother, but it was as if I grew up as an orphan. He said, what happened to those children who were actually living orphans? Their parents were alive, but they didn't have parents. And I want you to look at the third paragraph. One of Bowlby's main findings through his research with these children was that the statistics are crazy, 17 out of 44 thieves experienced early and prolonged separation, so 6 months or more, from their primary caregiver before the age of 5. So when we look at a system of prisons, of who's locked up, of who are the people that the cops are then going to take and they end up for life locked up, it's very often the children, 17 out of 44, that's huge numbers, of children who were separated from their parents for 6 months or more at a very, very young age, so 5 or under. In comparison, only 2 out of the 44 children who did not steal had experienced prolonged separation from their primary caregiver. Okay, so these are always their outliers in statistics. As my father always says, statistics is not a real science. But more specifically, Bowlby found that 12 out of 14 children who were categorized as affectionless were found to have experienced complete and prolonged separation before the age of 5. So the kids who just didn't know how to emote. When you went like this, they went like this. When you stuck out your hand, what do you want from me? They didn't develop the normal attachment and interaction that human beings have. And the primary reason, they didn't have healthy attachments when they were very young. When I was in my second year of my master's program, they took us to Newark. Now, for those of you not familiar, Newark, New Jersey, though it has an airport, is also known as a turnstile for criminals. So either they're coming or they're going, but it's basically that's how it works. So it was very interesting because we went to the Newark prison and they took us to jail in prison. Jail and prison are for the people who do misdemeanors in the prison and then they have to remove them. If you ever went to the zoo, the animals get treated better. Now I know my husband and I, God willing, we're working on publishing different articles on what does prison reform look like. It can't be that human beings are locked up like animals in cages and then we assume that when we let them out, they're somehow going to be good, productive human beings. But what was fascinating to me, so they had these rooms on top and there were tiny slits that they can look through. And it was very obvious that we were a group of Jews. So they started screaming obscenities at us. And I'm thinking to myself, you're the one locked up in a cage. It's amazing that you're screaming at me. But it was fascinating to talk to the prisoners. They let us sit with a couple of them. And one of them shared something very interesting. Well, I'll share the first one. He said, I don't even know I got locked up. I said, really? No, he was there for 25 years to life. We said, well, what did they? He said, yeah, I was in a party in New Jersey. And then I gave somebody a hitch and I took her to Pennsylvania and then they locked me up in jail. Turns out he wasn't her Uber driver. He kidnapped her and crossed state lines. And that's why he ended up in prison. But it was interesting to hear his perspective was he just gave somebody a hitch to a different state and doesn't know why he got locked up. The second guy we met was an Italian mobster. And he said, look, I did bad things. So when I was young, we were at a party and it very quickly got violent. And I knew that that night somebody was going to die. And I didn't want to die. So I took the first shot. He said, I know I am here, but I don't want to die. And I'm not telling you he's right. But when you meet the human being behind the crime, it's different. The prison wardens shared with us that over 70% of the children who go into foster care, they end up from foster care straight into the prison. And you have to ask yourself, what is it about our children and the healthy attachments and the good, caring, kind homes that unfortunately we don't provide? For those of you familiar with the foster system, it's another system that couldn't be more broken. So much so that we're turning out 70% of them are heading straight from their foster home, straight into a prison cell, because there's something lacking. There's something fundamental that's missing. And I want to take you to the next sociologist. If you look at the next page, his name is 2 pages. Her. Let's talk about her and then him. So Mary Ainsworth was a contemporary, but also a student of, and not direct student. It's somebody who was heavily influenced by the work of Bowlby. She lived in 1913 to 1999 across the pond, so stateside, born in Ohio and went to the University of Toronto. She developed something very interesting, which was testing the theories of Bowlby. So where Bowlby comes up with theories of healthy attachment, what does it look like for a young child to have a caregiver who loves, who cares, who nurtures? She went ahead and said, okay, so what's if we created a scenario that we can actually test this? And that is the strange situation. The strange situation is a room that kind of looks like this, but it has glass walls where the researchers could look in, but the participants don't know that somebody's observing them. If you look, there are 8 steps to how does it work. So the strange situation is, number 1, you have a caregiver and an infant in a room. Okay, you have a little baby, so you have, caregiver could be anybody, a mom, a dad, primary caregiver, the infant. A stranger comes in, the caregiver leaves. Caregiver comes in, caregiver leaves again, stranger is present, and then the caregiver returns. So you have your little kid, whether it's a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and the question is, what does the child do when the parent leaves, when the parent comes back, when the parent leaves again, when the parent comes back and the stranger is here? And they find something very interesting. That good, healthy, normal babies, parent leaves, what does the child do? Baby cries. How long does the baby cry? Oh, not too long, actually. Not too long. The baby cries, and then the baby easily gets distracted and starts playing with whatever's there, the person, the toys. Caregiver walks back in. What does the baby do? Healthy. Baby cries, starts crawling to the caregiver, right? Same thing. This repeats itself, minimal crying, but always going back to the main caregiver. You then end up with unhealthy attachments, and there are many different types where either the baby starts screaming, and you see this sometimes, especially by playgroup drop-off. You think, oh, that parent must be so good and loving. I'm not telling you to judge all the parents, but normally when the child is tantruming for 30 minutes, it's a symptom of there's something wrong with that relationship, because the child is terrified that if the parent leaves, parent's never coming back. And therefore they tantrum so desperately, they cling to the leg of the chair or the baby. They get so heavily attached because they're so scared. You later on in life find this showing up very often as anxiety, where people are scared. They're always worried. What happens if? What happens when? You unfortunately have a different kind of attachment, which is the opposite. Caregiver leaves, the child doesn't even look up. You say, wow, what a happy baby. It's amazing. And no, unfortunately, this baby from a very young age has learned that it doesn't help if they cry because nobody responds. And why should they then cry? So they become apathetic. This very often shows up later on in relationships. They have very hard times being intimate. How are they supposed to connect to another human being? The primary human being who should have, when they cried their first cry, picked them up, touched them, hugged them, kissed them, fed them, just abandoned them. So when it comes later on to building real relationships, they have what I call a feudal fence. You know, those, today we passed, for the first time, I think my kids saw this, a drawbridge, right? So I'm sure you see this all the time, but we were at the standstill because it picked up, and it reminded me of the moats that you see in the, you know, the feudal manors, where you have these big drawbridges that pick up and nobody's coming in. You sometimes meet such people and they're so prickly and abrasive, and you wonder, like, I just said hello, I didn't even do anything to you. Right, but they've learned that your hello is dangerous. They've learned already that human connection hurts. So they stay far away. Unfortunately, these problems, we think little problems, right? They say little people, little problems, big people, big problems. It's not true. Little problems, when left alone to their own devices, follow the laws of entropy. Are you familiar with the law of entropy? What's the law of entropy? Yeah, very good. Things that, it's physics. That's inertia. Okay, but close, come on. Right, so very good. Things that become worse with time. Don't worry, you're a doctor of hematology, not of physics. So entropy is the law that anything left over time, left to its own devices, will only get worse, not better. Okay, so for example, if you leave a house completely alone, you don't touch it for 30 years, it won't keep getting better and turn into a mansion. It's just going to become a haunted house. The windows are going to get shot out. The pipes are going to freeze. The toilet's going to overflow. That's the law of entropy. You find the same thing with human beings. People, when they don't deal with their problems when they're little, they don't just go away, right? I know I grew up in a house where anytime anything bothered us, my father said, just smile, it's good. And I'd say, Dad, but that's not how it works, right? Just smile, things feel better. Sometimes that's a good solution. But usually if we don't deal with it when they're little, they just get worse. And I want to share with you on the next page, this sociologist did things before they were codified. What do I mean? So unfortunately, we know that after World War II, they ended up having the Nuremberg laws, right? First the trials, then the laws. Particularly, these laws have to do with ethics, right? Why? Because the Germans, in the name of science, the inhumane is not a good word, right? Mengele and his whole team of researchers, the abhorrent things that they did, the heinous acts of again, I don't have good words. I don't know why, but when I was younger, the genre of books that I grew up reading were a bunch of Holocaust books. They made sure that from a very young age I could never sleep at night because I don't know who thought it was a good idea that a 9-year-old should be reading books about the Holocaust. I don't recommend it. In fact, one of my children was given a book to read in school about the Holocaust, and we politely wrote to the school that we don't feel it's appropriate at this age, and we're not sure at any age, that they need to be reading such material. Do we have to remember? Of course we have to remember. But everything has a time and place. So after World War II, the world got together and said, Trevor, we have to set some standards. on research, because you can't just in the name of science do crazy things like this. So this Harry Harlow is still in, though he's a little bit later on, today they critique much of what he did, of was it ethical or not. Now, he, similar to Bowlby, records that his mother suffered from tremendous depression, and she was very absent much of his life. Sometimes she was there, sometimes she wasn't, very ambivalent. And he, later on as an adult, suffered as well. And he always wanted to understand why. I mean, why is it that I feel so lonely, that I feel I can never make real connections, I can't get close to people, I'm always sad. So he said, I want to take Bowlby's work, I want to take Mary Ainsworth's work, and I want to do more research on it. So he found himself a bunch of monkeys, and he did something that, again, today would not necessarily pass the IRB. He took these, they were a specific rhesus monkeys. I don't know, they're the tiny little cute ones. And he took them at birth, separated them from their parents, and then he had two different groups. So one of them, he created two fake model mothers. One was made out of wires. So think of like if you go to a fence, those prickly wires, and it had the food attached to it. And the other one was made out of this very soft cotton cloth. Didn't necessarily provide food. And his observation was, where are the monkeys going to hang out? And he records that consistently, the monkeys would go get food. So they would go to the wires, they would go get the food, but immediately they would then go snuggle against the cloth. And any time that the monkey showed any sign of distress or sadness or anxiety, they always were found cuddling by the cloth. And he concludes with that we always think of nurture as food, especially if you're Jewish, right? You're full, here's a lollipop. I don't know, our mothers are forever stuffing us with food and food and food and food, and then they tell you, you look so fat. And what did you expect, right? But he said it was interesting because we always used to think that food is the most important thing, especially if you know anything about Maslow's triangle, right? The hierarchy of needs. The most basic thing a human being needs is food and shelter, which is true. But it only starts there, right? Food and shelter is not, it's maybe enough for a human being to survive. It doesn't let a human being thrive. And consistently, so we're talking about monkeys are not human beings, but yet these animals, they needed the connection of something warm, something cuddly, something fuzzy, that they would always go there. And I think you find that with people as well, where you can sometimes have homes that are modest. They don't necessarily have things to provide their children, whether it's the latest gadgets and toys and whatever Amazon's deals are giving us. I know I'm in a few groups of, deals, Dan's deals and all these, and we're forever ordering things that we don't need with, they say people buy things that they don't need with money they don't have to impress the people that don't even care about them. But you sometimes find that parents will say, yeah, you need the bathroom. Okay, go. Shh, thank you. Over there. Sometimes parents will tell you, I don't understand. I gave my child everything he needs. Why does my child never call me? Rav Sharkey actually says something beautiful, where he says, that's the point. Sometimes you think you're giving somebody everything they need, but ultimately you're crippling them. Because when you always do things for somebody, you don't let the person fly. You don't let them have their own wings. You don't let them experience things. I know my father-in-law was telling this to one of my girls today. They keep picking up the baby. But if you keep picking up the baby is never going to learn how to crawl. And if the baby doesn't learn how to crawl, they'll never learn how to walk. Because sometimes the greatest kindness is letting people spread their own wings and backing off. You don't always need to be overbearing. Not everybody needs your advice all the time. What they do need? Love, connection, nurture, stability. I need to know that you will always be there for me. I need to know that your love is unconditional. What does unconditional mean? It's very simple. Unconditional means there's no other attachment to it. When it starts having strings, it's no longer unconditional. It's not easy. It's a very, very easy thing to talk about. It's a very hard thing to have. Doesn't matter. If you signed up for the job to ruin another human being's life, you sure bet you then need to practice these things. And I'm talking to me, not you. We need to. Because without these human connections, the person wilts, wastes, and ultimately dies. That's the end. I want to take you, we have a little bit of time still? Okay. Another study. You have time for another study? Okay. I'll tell you, for sure have time for this study because this study has been going on for almost 80 years. So we have a few minutes for it. This study is currently happening. Okay, so it's a longitudinal study that started in the 1950s, I believe. 1938. Okay, so this started right before World War II, which is interesting to understand how that then skews things because wars always affect. But this is a Harvard study that was done on trying to understand what makes a human being happy. What makes a human being feel that their life is full of happiness and contentment. And if you look, we had somebody by the name of W.T. Grant, who was an American businessman and philanthropist who funded this long-term experiment. Originally, they took 268 Harvard college men across their entire lifespan. So they started off as sophomores and they followed them all the way until death. I believe that today there are only 11 of them still alive. Over time, the study revealed that the quality of close relationship, not wealth or status, was the strongest predictor of happiness and longevity, shaping what is now known as the Harvard Study of Adult Development. So if you go online, you can take this link. You'll see there's some very interesting information. There's also a TED Talk on when they were looking at this cohort. They eventually then grandfathered in their kids, their grandchildren, more people, and this is continuous. So we have already second generation, I believe maybe even third, where the question is what makes them say, yeah, I'm happy, I'm content, I like my life. In fact, they found that the greatest predictor of somebody in their 80s being happy was if in their 50s they were content. Meaning if they were able to say, I led a meaningful life, I'm happy with where I'm at, the relationships I have are good, the people that surround me, I love. That was a predictor not only that they would get there, but their life at 80 would still feel the same way. And it's interesting because usually if you ask people, what do you think is going to make you a happy life? Most people are going to tell you money. Yeah, money's a first. Money. They say money doesn't necessarily make you happier, but it definitely keeps you busy. In fact, I always think about it the opposite way. You know, some people, they're so poor that the only thing they have is wealth. Now, this is not to mock people who have money, right? Our Chachamim tell us that we do give kavod to people who have money, but simply when we idolize it, I believe it's Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler in the Michtav Meliyahu. He says the people who are pursuing money always think, that when I get to the wealth, I'm going to be happy. So they're still in the pursuit of happiness. But the saddest people, they're the ones who already made it to the top. And then their question is, now what? Now what? So I made it to the top, I finished. And he concludes, he says, the wealth itself is not the problem. But if that was your only goal, you're going to be sorely disappointed when you get there. If you pursue the wealth in addition to many other things that will bring meaning to your life, very good. So Torah, Gdula, B'makom Echad, it's unique, but it happens. Health, right? You would think health is a factor. The study shows no. The things that really matter the most as human beings is our connections. Do you have good friendships? And when I say good friendships, it's very subjective. So there are some people, they need 300 friends. There are some people, they need 3 friends. There are some people like me, I only need 1 friend. If you think I'm joking, it's true. My husband always tells me he's my best friend, and I say to him, no, you're my only friend. But it's true. Different people have different needs. Yeah. I once saw a good analogy. They said, you know, the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is the same thing. It's a battery pack. The extrovert, they go out to their social scene and they start charging. The introvert, they go out to the social scene and they start losing battery. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just a battery pack. But you have to know yourself. But human connection is critical. Not just human connection, good human connection. When you know that you have stability, that you have people in life you can rely on, that makes your life thrive. And when you don't, unfortunately, everything else doesn't matter. And I want to take you to our side of Chachamim. So if you look at 6, I told you this was my cheat sheet, not yours. So you're going to tell me what the Hebrew is. In Bereshit.
I've never seen you give your raw sources to anybody.
I know.
This is a very privileged.
Okay. In Bereshit, tell me the story. What happens with Adam? Huh? Oh, yafet. But what happened before that? HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates man. He creates man, remember? And he creates a whole beautiful world for him. But if you look into the 2nd chapter, Adam sees there are animals, there are plants, there's nature, but there's nothing for him. And if you look into the Midrashim, they're fantastical about how Kadosh Baruch Hu brings one animal at a time, and he says, Adam, name this one and name that one. And ultimately, Adam says, okay, so everybody has a partner. What about me? Right? What about me? And Kadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, what about you? He puts him to sleep. And then we have Chava, right? And then for the rest of the life, Adam goes blaming her, which is interesting. Maybe that's what he needed. He needed somebody to blame. But the truth is, they say there was once somebody who came to the rabbi and says, this is like, for days, I'm so worried. My wife, I hear her, she was whispering in the background to her mother that she's sick and tired of me. She wants to poison me. And I'm so scared. Everything, I can't touch anything. I can't eat, I can't drink, I can't sleep. What do you recommend? The rabbi says, I think I know your wife is a pretty decent person. Why don't you tell her to come talk to me? Okay, he brings his wife. The rabbi talks to her 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The wife leaves. The husband comes back in and he says, no, what do you think? The rabbi said, I'll tell you the truth. If I was you, I would drink the poison. And sometimes we see that, unfortunately, this lo tov heot ha'adam levado, eselo ezer kinegdo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's not good for humanity. It's not good for humanity. Maybe amoebas, they could thrive alone. Maybe plants, they could live alone. Human beings can't. It's not good for us. And the truth is, matzah isha, matzah tov. When it's good, it's the best relationship a human being could be in. But unfortunately, anything that has the capacity to be one way has the capacity to be the other direction as well. When things go poorly, they're the worst relationships to be in. Because the whole world, to keep your guard up. You're not necessarily my friend. I don't share my raw self with the whole world because I know to be concerned. But when two people say, you know what? I'm making the commitment that I'm 100% yours and you are 100% mine. That vulnerability is something that's so great. And it's something that allows the deepest human connection. The flip side, it's where a human being could get hurt the most because you let yourself be you for a moment. And then you got hurt. But our Chachamim tell us still, it's important because people are not designed to be alone. We find a very interesting story in the Gemara. So if you look at the next source in Ta'anit 23a, there's a pre-story to this, but I didn't share with you, about Choni HaMa'agal. Remember him? Why is he called Choni HaMa'agal? We say Ma'agal, Ma'agel.
When you grew up, they said Ma'agal.
I said Ma'agal.
When we grew up, they said
Ma'agel. Chazak u'varuch. Huh? Yeah, yafeh mod. But, Chaver, you should know, no, nobody should hold this against Rabbi. I always ask him to correct me specifically with my pronunciation. Should I tell you why? Very simple. Lo abayshan lomed. Because I grew up with a completely different Havara. And in my head, I'm translating it. Yeah? But my goal, Be'ezrat Hashem, one day is to learn to speak Hebrew properly. And the only way you can learn is if you're not afraid to learn from your mistakes. Okay? So this is something unsolicited advice. Yes?
You read and speak an expert Hebrew. It just was in the wrong side of the world.
I know. No, it's true.
Learning Hebrew.
No.
Bob's out of your Havara article, just so you should know.
It's true.
They speak a whole other dialect.
Chacham Yitzhak, the hardest thing is I know fluently. You're gonna laugh. When I learned dikduk. I didn't learn dikduk. So I always sing to him songs like Ani Shamarti Ata Shamarta Shamar. I learned all the Sheva Binyanim, but I learned it in a Havara that is so foreign that you know what you learn? The Chaval. If you teach things right the first time, then you never have to relearn it because unfortunately, our Chachamim tell us in Pirkei Avot, when you teach a child, It's domeh to a blank paper. Whatever you write on it, that's what it is. When you try to relearn things, it's like you took the paper and you ever tried whiteouting things? Yeah, you ever see the kids, they scratch it out, and now there are holes on the other side of the page? Chaval. Okay, talking about Choni Hamagel. Nachon? Yeah. So there's a pre-story to it where he meets somebody planting a tree and he tells him, what are you doing? You're never going to live to see the fruits of this. He says, right, maybe I'm not going to benefit, but my children will. Meaning, I'm not selfish. Just because I will not see the reward of what I'm doing today doesn't mean that society won't benefit from what I'm doing. And he falls into a deep sleep, kind of like Rip Van Winkle. He wakes up 70 years later. This is where the story happens. So Choni went home and he said to the members of his household, first he went to the Bet Midrash. No, sorry, he went home. Nobody knows him. And he asks, comes to his house, comes to the same old address. He says, is the son of Choni alive? And they say to him, no, unfortunately, he's not alive, but the grandson is. So he goes and he introduces himself. And they say, sorry, sir, you must be a crazy nut job, but we don't know you. Our grandfather's been gone a long time ago. And they shut the door. They didn't believe him. So where does he go? He goes to the Bet HaMidrash. He comes there and he hears the Chachamim studying different halachot. And he hears them quoting him, which is something very beautiful. He hears them learning his Torah. So he comes and he says, hey, Chaver, that's me. Let me tell you how I taught it. And they look at him and they say, another delusional man. It happens, especially in Jerusalem. You know, it's called Jerusalem syndrome. Yeah? They say there was once somebody who got locked up because he started having Jerusalem syndrome. And the guy near him, he says, you don't understand. He turns to his friend and says, guy's crazy. He got locked up because he thinks he's God. So his friend says, yeah, isn't that crazy? But how do you know he's not? He said, because I am, right? So this is like, unfortunately, a whole society. But this is true. The Simpsons actually did a very funny episode on Jerusalem syndrome. Worth your watch. It's about 5 minutes. Choni HaMagal is crazy. Who are you? And he walks out of the Bet Midrash. So here he had come home, assuming that the people, again, who he loved, who he trusted, who he was once a part of, they would embrace him. And instead, now obviously this is an Agadah, so you have to learn it properly, okay? I'm teaching it to you, not for real. I'm teaching it to you for the end. He comes to the Bet Midrash. His assumption is this is where his real friends are. These people are going to quote him. They learned with him. If not them, their fathers, their grandfathers. And when he leaves with this devastating isolation of, I'm a nobody. I don't matter to anybody. And the Chachamim then say, Rava says, this explains the folk saying, which is, O chavruta, O mituta. Either I need a friendship, or I'd rather be dead. For those of you who have ever moved, cities, states, countries, you may have felt that feeling. I know that when I was 19, my parents made Aliyah. And I was I had a big ego. I had just finished teaching for 2 years. I was just finishing my BA. My assumption was that when I get off the airplane on the tarmac, there are probably going to be people with posters saying, we want to hire Devorah. That was my assumption. And then I remember 6 months later, I got dressed and I had got my clothing on, my makeup, my shoes. And then I sat down on the couch because I was ready to go nowhere because I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a job. I didn't have friends. And I remember sitting there and just crying and thinking, how could it be? I know I'm a somebody. I know I'm worth something. I know that I have so much to give to the world, but I'm living somewhere that nobody even knows I exist. If they pass my house now, they don't even know that I'm in here. I remember thinking, I can go out on the street. I can be dressed like a clown and it wouldn't even matter to anybody because I am a nobody in the society here. That was very humbling. That was a very humbling thing to recognize that even if I'm a somebody somewhere, when you're a foreigner and you're a stranger, you don't matter. It's why Avraham Avinu is giving the blessing when he's on a journey that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, don't worry, even though you're going to journey, I'm still going to make your name great. Because the tendency is when people move and when people go to other places, they become nobodies. And it takes a very long time until you find yourself and your place and you establish yourself again. Now I want to talk about 2 solutions and then maybe the real solution. Tell me, we started at 8:45, I think. So I'm going to go till 9:45. Yeah? Okay. I think to combat loneliness, we have what I call a bad solution and then the real solution. I want to tell you about the bad solution. So the bad solution is written about in the book by Elias Canetti. Elias Canetti is such a beautiful author that I can't recommend his works enough on crowds and power. A Sephardic Jew from Bulgaria. So if you look at source 8, he was born from 1905, lived until 1994. He was a Bulgarian Jewish writer, thinker, and Nobel laureate whose work explored power, fear, and belonging in human societies. In Crowd and Power, he argued that humans are deeply afraid of isolation and vulnerability, and that crowds temporarily relieve this fear by dissolving individuality into collective unity. He says something very interesting. This is an entire book that he dedicates on the one hand, we have this war. We are terrified of being alone. People think about it this way. I remember I was once out on a lake in a canoe all by myself, and I was loving it until I couldn't see the shoreline. And then suddenly I had this panic in me of, I don't know, maybe there's sea monsters and creatures, and what's if I disappear off the face of it? I can tell you, I couldn't wait to get back to the shore. I remember thinking to myself, this is so silly. I know where the shoreline is. I'm not alone. But human nature is that people are terrified of being alone. And they will do so many things to make sure, on the one hand, they're not alone. The flip side, people are terrified of connection. You ever bump into somebody on the street? What? Why? What are you so afraid of? Because for a brief moment, somebody entered your little bubble. For a brief moment, there was an interaction, and that was really, really scary. And you have this dynamic where we're terrified of being alone, but because we feel that we have no skills on how to connect, we're also terrified of being connected. And instead of saying, okay, so maybe we have to fix that problem, right? Maybe we have to teach people how to connect properly. Maybe we have to learn, again, what does it mean to be in communities where human beings can be individuals and yet part of a whole. We've developed something else. We've developed crowds. What are crowds? Think of if you have any concerts, right? It's a whole bunch of individuals that for a moment become suspended as a person and they mesh together as one entity. There's a show, there's a speaker, there's a band. And for a brief moment of time, I can lose me. I don't mind if the person near me is pushing me, and I don't care if we're dancing together and we're sweating together, and because there's a cohesion. The minute the music stops, the person who 2 minutes ago was all on top of you, push you, this is the start of a fist fight. What happened? Because for a moment we had a crowd, and when that moment passed, we became individuals all over again, and those big, big towers, they're right back. And it's interesting because we find that a lot of the world deals with the fear of isolation by creating crowds. What do I mean by creating crowds? I'm going to talk about the Jewish community because that's what I care about today. Many communities are warm and welcoming as long as you conform to what they want, right? So if you dress like me and you talk like me and you think like me and you subscribe to what I want, Baruch haba, welcome. But if you decide to step out of that boundary in any direction, not only you're not part of me, but all the warmth and love that you felt will now be hatred and wrath and coldness because you're no longer one of me. Now I have to tell you, the Hasidim, we've perfected it. What do I mean? Every Hasidic group will have a list called Anash. Do you know what Anash stands for? It doesn't mean snack. Yeah. What does it mean? Very good. It's a term, Anshe Shlomenu, meaning the people that we are in peace with. Now I'm going to give the Hasidim not credit, but this developed during the early years of Hasidut where there were tremendous wars. When I say tremendous wars, it is not normal, okay? That there are different Hasidic groups that celebrate, oh, the Rebbe got out of prison today and yesterday. And you have to ask yourself, who put him in prison? Oh, it was the other Jews of the community. Oh, he was almost killed because that is not a normal reality. You understand? But that, unfortunately, was what was happening in Europe. And they would go, let's say you're going from Poland and you're traveling to Ukraine. You're a nobody. How does the community know you're a safe person, marked safe? So you come with a little petek, a note that lets the other people know he's one of us. He's one of us. And if you're one of us, we're going to take care of you. We're going to love you. We're going to care for you. We're going to... But if you're not, go to the next town. Now, you know, they're not so original. This originated, I believe, in England, where they had a certain writ as well, that you had to go from town to town, proving that you're one of us. But there's something very sick about that. Because what happens when, in the name of unity, we push everybody to become conformists, and suddenly we lose the individual, because now you can't be you. You can't think you. You can't act you. You can't be you, because the price you will pay is you will lose your entire world, because your world doesn't have room for you. It has room for a crowd. It has room for one big melting pot that if you're willing to conform to, that's okay. But in the process, what very often happens is, try to fit somebody into a box. The human being is so big. So sure, you can crush it. You can crush the human spirit. But you know what happens? Remember Humpty Dumpty? All the king's horses and all the king's men, they couldn't put them together again. You know why? Because once you broke the human being, you can't put them together again. So what does it help that we've now pushed everybody into a really square box where they conform, they listen, they know the rules. But the human spirit is lost. The creativity, the beauty, the originality. What do you have now? One of the people that I spoke to in my research on suicide, Hasidic guy from Borough Park, about 34 years old. So I wish you could tell the world that all the faces you see are just a bunch of dead people walking around. That's what we are. I said, why? He said, because we don't matter. I'm just part of a much bigger mass. And as long as I wear my shtreimel, and as long as I wear my jacket, and I know it's nice to hate on the Hasidim, yeah? But I'm going to hate on us. We all have our box that we decide people need to fit into. So if this is a group of rationalists and a Kabbalist walks in, hell has no fury what's going to happen to them, right? And if I'm a group that believes that we need to be more moderate and then a radical walks in, you should see how radical I become, right? And I believe that if we were honest about ourselves, in each one of us, there's a box that we've created. It's why you have this when you meet people. We always talk about love at first sight. There's also hate at first sight. You meet somebody and I hate you already. I don't even know you, but I just don't like you. And I'm telling you that we, as human beings, again, it's easy to hate on the other, but we also create boxes that people have to fit. And when they don't fit that box, I immediately, instead of saying, well, let me entertain you, let me get to know you, let me think maybe I have room in the broader society for you to also exist. No, I reject you. I put you in my phone as DNA. You know what DNA stands for? Do not answer. Yeah, please. Never call again. I don't want to know you. We all have those people on our list. I want to take you to the last and maybe most important source. I'm not going to read to you, but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. You know, when I was growing up, I heard a lot of nice things about Sephardim. What do I mean by nice? Not true. No, I did. I actually heard very nice things. The one thing they always said was, Sephardim, they have so much emunah. You know what it means? I'll tell you what it means. My mother-in-law brought up 5 boys in a house with white carpet. And one of the American neighbors once came to visit and said, oh, Judy, you're so brave. And you know what they meant? Oh, you're so stupid, right? So there's double talk here. So when Ashkenazi people say, oh, they have so much emunah, you know what they mean? They have no brains. Oh, yeah? And that sentiment was something I always grew up, wow, they have so much emunah, tzaddikim. And then I moved to Israel and I realized, yeah, it's true. There's a lot of emunah. But that's not accurate about Sephardim. There's something it's not accidental about Sephardic Judaism that is very attractive, that is very correct in a world that's trying to conform and coerce everybody to be one way. And for me, it was Silichot. My parents live in Shchonat HaBukharim, and across from them is one of the largest Sephardic synagogues. I remember the first year I lived there, starts Silichot. When I tell you thousands, it's not an exaggeration. thousands upon thousands of people started flocking out onto the street. And I'm looking down, and unlike, they tell you the Levaya of the Gadol of Yisrael, right? The great of the Jewish people. And then you see there's only one type of Jew there. And you say, how could it be the Jew? How could it be he was the leader of all the Jewish people if everyone here is just black and white? Can't be. I would look out my window. I couldn't believe it. Every stripe, every color, every shape, every denomination. We're talking about from 12 o'clock in the morning to about 4 o'clock in the morning. Music blaring. There was popcorn. It felt like a carnival. Everybody screaming, Adon Asilichot. I'm thinking, why? What makes somebody come out in the middle of the night consistently to be part of this crowd? What is it about this crowd that makes somebody say, I want to be here? And I think that Rav Chaim Shoshana said it best. So I want to tell you what he said. And for those of you who would like, there's some YouTube videos of him. He has such a beautiful face. A Chacham from Morocco and from Marrakesh, who later on learned and then was he was a Dayan under Rabbi Shalom Assas, later emigrates to Israel, becomes the chief rabbi of Be'er Sheva, where he's buried. For those of you familiar with Rabbanit Yemima Mizrahi, this is her grandfather. I don't subscribe to her Judaism, but his I like. He was interviewed. He was talking about Pesach. He said, I want to tell you. You want to know what Pesach in Morocco looked like? He said, already by Arvit, the ladies of the house started spreading out all the rugs in their courtyards. He said, you have to understand, we lived in courtyards, right, where everybody spreading out their rugs, bringing out the tables. And then slowly, the men are in Arvit, the women are at home setting up. As soon as the Chag was over, the mufleta came out, the arak came out, the nana came out, the flour came out, the coins in there came out. He said, all night, we went from house to house to house. He said, it wasn't because we just liked to party. He said, you see, I don't think you understand that Sephardic culture is intentional. It didn't just happen because, they have so much emunah. It's because this is what Judaism is. How could it be that 8 days we're having a holiday, and by the end, we're not all best friends? How could it be that for 8 days we're serving God, and the natural next step is, of course, we're now family. And the way to show it is by eating together, by singing together, by hugging each other, by making sure that you know I'm your brother, I'm your sister. Because it doesn't matter if during these 8 days we didn't eat together and we didn't pray in the same synagogue. It's okay. You like this tune, I like that tune. It doesn't matter. Because our culture is one of warmth, is one of love, is one of consistently saying, you're my brother, you're my sister, you're my family, and it doesn't matter where on the spectrum you're going to find yourself, you are part of my nation. And then he takes a little jab and he says, unfortunately,
Can you please read us the bottom of
you want me to read it to you?
a little bit?
Where? Im ani rotze lashiv?
Yeah, that whole paragraph.
Okay. Yeah? Okay, I'm just...
Here the whole hour, they're going to...
Yalla. You see, Keta video, it even tells you the timestamps. He says, אם אני רוצה להשיב על השאלה, מה החשיבות, ואם כדאי להעביר את החשיבות בדברים האלה לדורות בפרט לאותם שהם כבר יצאו ממרוקו, והם גרים עכשיו בארץ, אני יכול להשיב בשתי מילים. You want to know the Sephardic philosophy? You want to know the antidote to orthodoxy? The antidote to crowds and power? The antidote to Humpty Dumptys? He says, kiruv levavot, bringing human beings' hearts close together. העניין הזה שבני אדם מבקרים זה אצל זה, ויושבים בצוותא, באהבה, באחווה, ברעות, זה קירוב לבבות ממש. It's really nice to talk about achdus. Achdus, peace, peace, peace. And then you go protest and throw things at people and then hate people and you're not coming to my Thanksgiving dinner and New Year's you're not invited to my party and this one's being written out of the will. So what is this nonsense? He says, you want to know what it is? True love, coming together and saying, I don't care about our differences. Why do we always have to agree to be friends? Why can it be that you and I, we can fight about everything, but the one thing we're going to never, ever, ever give up on is our relationship, our friendship, our familyhood. זה דבר שכל התשתית של הקהילה ושל החברה מושתת על דבר כזה. You want to know what the foundation of any community is? You cannot build any institution, any functional unit without the base being kiruv levavot. You know why I build this community? Because I love other human beings. I didn't say Jews. Because I love other human beings. And to the extent that my heart has love, that's how big my institution can be. אם אני לא אהיה קרוב אלייך, ואת לא קרובה אליי, if you're not close to me, and I'm not close to you, והלבבות שלנו רחוקים זה מזה, אז תמיד אנחנו שונאים. If you and I don't love each other and our hearts aren't pulsing the same way, then really we're just enemies.
He was being interviewed by a female journalist.
Yeah.
And he's speaking to her in the feminine. If my heart is not close to yours and your heart is not close to me.
Because it was a world that was once normal. Because today they would accuse him of what, yeah. אנחנו מתייחסים בשנאה. He says in a heavy accent when you hear the video. אחד לשני, אני לצערי עוד, לא רק עוד, הרבה מזה יש בארץ. אותו החמימות, אנחנו לא, he says, אותו החמימות, אנחנו לא מרגישים אצל אחינו האשכנזים, למשל. סליחה. He said, I'm sorry to say this, but this love, this warmth, this brotherliness, unfortunately, the other side of the aisle, notice he calls them our brothers, they don't have it. He says, אצל אותם, אבל זה מובן מאליו, הם באו מארצות קרות כל כך, מוכרחים להיות קרים. He said, look, there's nothing I can do. They come from Poland and Russia and Siberia where the tundra is frozen all the year. Of course their hearts are frozen. It barely beats. I'm always cold. And my husband always says, must be because you're Ashkenazi, you're a lizard. But that's, what can you do?
I never said that.
Yeah, you see? It's okay. Lizards sometimes warm up in the sun too. Yeah. He says, מוכרחים להיות... אנחנו באים מארץ חמה, אנחנו גם כן מתחממים. He says, don't think, we come from warm cultures, and yes, sometimes our warmth turns into fire, אבל לא עד כדי כך, לא עד כדי מכות ומרוקאי סכין. He says, okay, let's make sure that our nature is tempered. So they're so frozen cold that you feel like you're talking to a dead fish. He said sometimes our heat gets so heated that the stereotype of the Moroccan with a knife, it doesn't have to be, right? אני לא מסכים לחמימות כזאת. אני מסכים לחמימות של האהבה שלנו. I want to end with that. You like it, you don't like it. There's a Jewish culture that Am Yisrael once had. And the Torah was not given in Poland, nor in Germany. Also not Iraq. Okay? Not in Morocco too. But no, surprise. But it was closer. Why do I say closer? Because the Jews are from the Middle East. I hate when they tell you, oh, this is Arabic hospitality. Ever hear that term? Sheka v'chazav. What is Arabic mentality? This is Abrahamic hospitality. Oh, the problem is we like to think we're French, and we like to think we're German, so the world believes us. And then we start acting like them. But it's not true. Am Yisrael's culture has always been warm. We always love, demonstratively, verbally, hugging, kissing, constantly. Forgive me, I'm going to share a story about my mother and my mother-in-law. I'm going to end with that. When I first got married, I went to visit. When I went to visit my parents for the first time after we got married, I came to my parents' house, and as customary, I kissed my dad on his hand. And then when I came into the house, I came to hug my mother. And then about 20 minutes later, I went to hug her again. And then like 10 minutes later, I hugged her again. And then she called me into the kitchen and she said, Devorah, I don't want to interfere, but it's your marriage, okay? I said, yeah, why? She said, why do you keep hugging me? What's wrong? I said, I forgot you're not my mother-in-law. She said, what does that mean? I said, with my mother-in-law, if we don't hug each other every 20 minutes, it means we're fighting. It's not true. I love my mother-in-law. I'm so blessed. That's the truth. I'm very, very blessed to have in-laws like I do. But the Jewish culture is one of closeness, where, of course, we have our differences. Esther, I'm going to mention it again because you're here. When my husband spoke to your dad the first time, he said, if 95% of the time we agree and 5% of the time we disagree, so it means we're 95% friend and not 5% enemy. That's the culture of Am Yisrael. You want to understand how to create healthy attachment. What is it like not to need therapy? I don't want to be out of business. But I could tell you that a world that is suffering from loneliness and depression, and all we do is pop pills and tell them to pay $250 an hour to a therapist who then they can't contact, not before or not after, and somehow that's supposed to cure their loneliness, that couldn't be further from the truth. But the other side is also not true. It can't be that in order for me to feel a part of something, I have to erase myself so much so to conform so that I don't exist. And I'm looking at us. We're a small group, but we're mighty. Kind of like our Kiwi box. It says small but mighty. That's us. We have something that is true. And I'm looking at us, Sephardim. We have a culture that is Am Yisrael's culture. It is warm. It is loving. Sure, there are problems. Okay, we solve it. We know how. But the overall attitude has to be one of, I am part of your family. And if I'm your family, you don't have the ability to divorce me and throw me out just because I dress differently, or I think differently, or I sing differently, or I act differently, because he can't get rid of me. You're going to have to contend with me for the rest of your life. And you know what happens? When you make that commitment, you suddenly realize, well, if I have to stay with you forever, I might as well learn how to put up with you. I might as well learn how to love you because you're here forever. So let's make it work. And I'm looking at a world that is so shattered and broken. And I'm saying, let's first start with us, because I believe that when the Jewish people figure it out, we will then be able to, God willing, tell the world, come, Vivek Murthy, you had a problem, we have a better solution. But before we get there, we have to be critical of our own communities and say, what are the things that are dividing us? It makes sense that we fight what kind of tea the Bet Knesset should and shouldn't have. Nonsense. It makes sense that we fight over fill in the blank. Nonsense. We have to go back to our culture of warmth, of love, of ahava, v'achva, shalom, v'rayut, closeness, friendship, love, ability to say, I'm going to end with Voltaire, because I like him. He said, Voltaire, who was one of the early writers about freedom of speech, he said, even if I disagree with everything you say, I will defend to death your right to say it. And I'm asking us, we have so much richer than just that. We as a nation, we as Sephardim have a model that works to be able to say, come be part of my family. I don't care what you wear. I don't care what you think. I don't even care who you are. I want to make sure that you can be part of this crowd where you're part of a community that loves you and you never lose your own identity. And Bezrat Hashem, I'm asking all of us, I want to thank you, because that's how we felt. I know I'm speaking for me, my husband, and my family. We found such a place. This place with Rabbi Yitzhak and Rabbanit Jacqueline, it feels like home. It feels like a family. And I'm asking you, guard this family with everything you can, because this family must exist. But I'm also blessing us that this family should just continue to grow, to become bigger, to be more inclusive. And Bezrat Hashem, we're looking to see this family more and more and more. And until then, Bezrat Hashem, we shall have a wonderful night.